Linda Hazard was born in 1867 and died in New Zealand at age 70 after giving herself her own lethal treatment methods. Because, see, she was a doctor, though she had never been to medical school. Well, she was a doctor in her own head anyway. She was not really a doctor, but she had a license to practice medicine in Washington state. The state had a loophole that allowed some alternative medicine practitioners to practice medicine with no formal training. She claimed to have studied under a doctor who was an advocate of fasting. She would go on to develop her own fasting method that she claimed would cure almost any disease and detoxify the body. She wrote 3 books about the science of fasting: Fasting for the Cure of Disease, Diet in Disease and Systemic Cleansing, and Scientific Fasting, the Ancient and Modern Key to Health, which was really an extended version of her first book. In Olalla, Washington, she opened a sanitarium. She called it Wilderness Heights, but the locals called it Starvation Heights. Patients would arrive there and fast for a period between days and months. The fast would consist of asparagus juice, a bit of tomato, and sometimes a bit of orange juice. Few of her patients would survive, and many would die. To keep her business alive, she of course had a reason that they died. Well, it was cancer or cirrhosis. Publicly, she would never admit it was starvation. Publicly, locals understood that the patients who found themselves at Starvation Heights were actually starved to death. In 1910, an engineer by the name of Earl Edward Erdman died of starvation after Hazard's treatments, which she and her bigamous husband called the beautiful treatment. He kept a diary of the treatment he received, which described that during days 1 through 11, he had an orange, basically for breakfast, and mashed soup for lunch and dinner, until day 9, when the soup went from a mashed soup to strained soup. From then on, he had a few oranges on day 12 and 13, then strained tomato broth or oranges for the next 13 days. He kept that up until he died after 56 days. Aside from the dangerously lacking diet, patients sometimes also dealt with having daily enemas, sometimes hours long, and vigorous massages that some nurses would say sounded more like beatings than massages. Then there were the scalding hot baths and the financial tomfoolery. In 1912, she was finally charged and convicted of manslaughter. The patient was a wealthy British woman, Claire Williamson, who weighed less than 50 pounds before she died. Not only did Hazard starve the woman to death, but she also forged a will. Why do so many of these caregivers forge wills? And stole most of the woman's valuables. Claire was at Starvation Heights with her sister Dorothea, who a lot of people called Dora, who was also being treated. Hazard had been appointed Dora's guardian for life by this point. Dora only survived the severe nature of the so-called treatment because her governess and then an uncle went there and took her out of the sanitarium. And Hazard just challenged them the entire time, trying to keep Dora in the sanitarium. One of the sisters had smuggled a telegram out of the sanitarium to be sent to their governess, Martha Conway, in Australia, where she was visiting family. Unfortunately, by the time the telegram got to Margaret, Claire was already dead, and Dora was near death, far too weak to walk out of the place on her own, and unable to sit without agonizing pain. She weighed, this fully grown woman, less than 60 pounds on her rescue. She may have been in league with a local mortuary who allegedly switched Claire's body with another so that no one would see how skeletal Claire had been when she finally died. Hazard would claim political persecution at her trial For manslaughter, Hazard got 2 to 20 years in prison. She was sent off to Walla Walla and released after serving only 2 years. The governor of the state at the time, in 1916, would pardon her on the condition that she leave the U.S. and move to New Zealand. Good luck, New Zealand, right? She did move to New Zealand, where she unbelievably practiced as a dietitian and osteopath for some 4 years until 1920. A newspaper there would publish that she had been practicing, that she had a practicing certificate from Washington State's Medical Board, but that did not entitle her to use the title of doctor in New Zealand. She was charged for practicing medicine without a license, found guilty, and paid about a £5 fine and then costs. By the time she moved back to the States in 1920, her license in Washington State had finally been revoked. That didn't stop her, though. She opened another sanatorium, which she called a school of health, and continued to have patients fasting there until 1935. People continued to starve to death there. Then suddenly this sanitarium was burned to the ground and never rebuilt. She herself, while fasting, died of starvation in 1938, as I said, following her own treatments. Though she was never charged, it is suspected that she was responsible for the deaths of 3 patients in each of 1908 through 1910, then 4 in each of 1911 and 1912, and that amounts to about 17 deaths. Daisy Maud Haglund was one of the earlier victims, dying after fasting for 50 days. Her son was only 3 when she died. The son, Ivar, would grow up to open a chain of seafood restaurants in Seattle and area. Many of the victims signed over large parts of their estate over to Hazard before they died. But despite all of this, despite the 17 deaths, and it could actually be more than 40, and then the continued starvation for some 15 years at the School of Health, she was never charged again. That was it. That was it for her until she died herself. Until next Saturday, that's what we've got. See you then. Have a great week. If you're enjoying these videos and want more, don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any videos. Thank you for watching. We really appreciate it.